Great. Well, I'm thrilled to have you here. So, good on everybody who's here for reading your emails / looking at your calendar, because we're on a different day of the week and a different time of day because daylight savings has ended in Melbourne. So if you're here, that means you didn't get thrown by that. So congratulations. And if you're listening to this afterwards because you're like, dang it, I showed up at the regular time and there was nothing happening, we're on a new time and new day from now on. We've shifted a day ahead and daylight savings has ended here in Melbourne. So check your emails, check your calendar invites because they are correct. So just a tiny bit of housekeeping. Most of you on the call have done this before, so we'll keep it brief, but we are recording this, so it will be available, and the recording will be available in our Facebook group afterwards for you or anybody else to check out. I've got a couple of questions. Well, actually, I've got many more than a couple. I've got probably 15 or 20 questions that have come through during the week, but I really do want to make time for a conversation between those of us who are here online. Hi, Tracy. Nice to have you with us. So I'm just going to go ahead and start by talking about a couple of questions that I've got through the interwebs, and then I'm going to hand it over to you guys and whatever it is that you'd like to talk about. So first in, first serve. So please type in your questions into the chat, and you don't have to type an essay. You can just type a placeholder, and then when I'm ready to ask you that, you can just unmute and tell me the context in a bit more detail if you want. So enter your questions into the chat. And to begin, there's a question from Melissa, and Melissa says, do we need to worry about flat feet? Pilates teachers seem to love to cue lift your arches. Is this helpful? Or given some of us seem to be born with high arches and some of us with flat feet, do our bodies just accommodate whatever type of feet we have? Well, this is a thing that I've noticed a lot in Pilates. And those of you with us, like, show of hands or unmute and tell me about it. Like, is this something that is a thing in your working environment? Like, do people worry about their arches? Do you feel like this is something you need to correct for people, or is there some kind of pressure in your workplace to fix this for people? Or are you guys just like so post biomechanical now that you're just truly existing in an enlightened nirvana where everybody is truly evidence-based? Andrea, I see you typing, but I know that you're not too bashful to just unmute and tell us verbally what's on your mind. So go ahead.
Well, it wasn't going to be anything interesting. I was going to say, no, I must be biomechanically blah, 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 because I don't have that problem.
Awesome.
Don't come across it.
Good for you. So this is definitely, when I was training, this was a thing that we were taught, to correct. And I've had a lot of graduates over the years come back to me and ask me about it, saying, oh, at my workplace, they told me I need to correct someone's pronation or their flattened arch. And, how do I do that? And so there's a fair bit of literature on this, and I would say it's at this stage, it's incomplete. I'd say it's an open question as to whether having a flat arch is good, bad, or just interesting. Mostly what the literature looks at is runners. So typically they'll look at a cohort of runners, people who run regularly or marathon runners or whatever, and they'll give them all an arch measurement. They'll measure how high their arches are or whatever, and then they'll follow them for a year and see who gets injured and who doesn't. And one very big study of about 1,000 people found that there was no difference in the number of injuries between people who had flat arches and people who had high arches. In fact, they found a very slight trend towards increased injuries in people with high arches in that one study. And then other studies find that people with flattened arches have increased incidence of some injuries, but not others. So they might find that people with low arches, have increased. And I might get this incorrect, but it might be like shin splints or something, or it might be knee pain that they get more of. But when you look at total injuries, often it's a wash. So it might be that when you roll your foot in, you have a more of a flattened arch, you put more stress on some areas, but you put less stress on other areas, right? Like if you're shifting the stress around, it goes from one place to the other place. So maybe you end up getting more injuries in one place, but less injuries in the other place. And if you lift up your arches, it's the opposite, right? So you take the stress off those places where you would have stress if you rolled in, but the stress doesn't go away. The stress just shifts to somewhere else, right? So you end up getting different injuries. So I would say at this stage, in my view, there's not really a strong argument for making adjustments to people's arches. But it's kind of a watch this space. Like we do definitely know that expensive running shoes and custom-made orthotics are no better than just $2.50 Dunlop volleys from the supermarket in terms of running injury risk. So yeah, I would say just choose your shoes based on comfort, and you don't really need, I'd say there's not really compelling evidence that you need to, lift someone's arch. And that there's not even, I don't know of any evidence that's looked at like, can you actually do that? If you tell someone to lift up their arches, okay, they might be able to do it standing in Pilates class, but when they've run 5 kilometers and they're really fatigued, do they maintain that? Don't know. So, hope that helps, Melissa. The short answer is, do we need to worry about flat feet? I would say no. And if you just go up to Google, in fact, I'm going to see if I can find it here for you. There's a really awesome, yes, here it is. Really awesome video. I'm not sure if, I think I should be able to share it with you. This is Haile Gebrselassie, who many people consider to be one of, if not the greatest marathon runners of all time, multiple-time world champion, multiple-time Olympic medalist in the marathon, which, anyway, watch him run. Can you see his feet, his ankles? So, yeah, could you see that in his running style? I mean, what if you were his running coach, what would you say to him? Good God, man, lift your arches up. But then if he turned around and said, well, here are my 25 world records, and here are my 3 Olympic gold medals, what are your credentials to tell me how to run? I think that would be a difficult one to respond to for most of us. So I think there are equally examples of elite runners who don't pronate, right? So I think the take-home message is not everyone should try and pronate and then you become a world-class marathon runner. But I think a good message to take home is like, even some of the greatest runners of all time with, careers spanning multiple decades at the highest levels of the sport, and just think how many tens of thousands of kilometers you would have to run to win 24 or to break 24 world records of the marathon. Like how much training over how many decades would go into that, and how many miles, in that man's legs, and running like that the whole time, and to sustain a career at that level for 2 decades and break 24 world records, you can't spend a lot of time off injured. So must be working for him. Yeah. Any thoughts on that? I'm hoping that's not too shocking for you. All right. Next one I want to talk, answer is, I believe it's from Tracy, who's on the call. Andrea says, is that his biomechanics, would there be more like, if that's his biomechanics, would there be more likelihood of injury to him trying to change his running style or the way he lands? Speaking of that, what are your thoughts on orthotics? Well, orthotics don't change risk of running injury, so I don't really rate them. But yeah, that's a really interesting point, Andrea, about, well, if somebody's, the idea that technique's important if you want to perform at the highest level. Like, I'm sure that we know from research, elite runners run more efficiently than non-elite runners. Like, they use less energy to run at the same speed. They're more efficient. And so, definitely technique is important. There's such a thing as good technique. But perhaps because each of us has a different structure, different, oxidative capacity in our muscles, different length of ligaments, whatever it might be, maybe there is no one perfect technique. Maybe perfect technique is relative to each of our individual, body mass, limb length, muscle fiber composition, etc. And so one person's perfect technique will be another person's far less than perfect technique. And so, well, let's do a little experiment. Come up to standing if you would. Right. So if you stand with your weight kind of centered on your feet, so you're not kind of rolling, if you're not rolling them out, you're not rolling them in. They're kind of, there's an equal weight between kind of the big toe side of your foot and the little toe side of your foot. Okay. That's what we'd call a neutral foot position, neither pronated, rolled in, or supinated, rolled out. Well, if you roll your feet in, so flatten your arches, bring the weight to the inside of your feet. Okay. Well, did you notice that your knees moved, right? Your knees came in, right? And actually, if you come back to your starting position and then roll in again and then roll out and do that a couple of times, you'll probably be able to notice that as you move your feet in, actually your thighs rotate. Your thighs rotate inwards, right? As your feet roll in. Can you experience that? Right? And actually, again, this is pretty subtle, but you'll probably be able to pick it up if you really focus on it. As you roll in, your thighs roll in, your tibias, your shin bones roll out, right? So if you start with your feet perfectly parallel in the neutral position, okay, and roll your feet in, now your toes are pointing out a little bit, right? And your heels are pointing in a little bit. And that's because because of that, your shins, your tibias are turned out a bit relative to your thighs. So anyway, whether you can perceive that or not is not terribly important. But as you roll your feet in, something happens at your ankle, something happens at your knee, and what happens at your hip, right? Your hips adducted, right, and rotated internally. Okay, so anytime that you pronate your foot, you change not just the foot, but the ankle, the knee, and the hip, right? So now I'm going to give you a challenge. You up for a challenge? Thumbs up if you're up for a challenge. All right. Your challenge is to not move your hips or your knees, right? Keep your hips. So start with a parallel feet with equal weight on the inside and the outside of the foot, a neutral position. Okay. Now, without moving your hips or your knees, roll your feet in. Can you do it? It's a trick question. You can't do it, right? It's not possible. All right. So you can take a seat now. So anytime, right? So the lesson there is anytime you change your foot position, you also change your knee position. Anytime you change your knee position, you change your hip position, because as you learned in kindergarten, the ankle bone connects to the shin bone, and the shin bone connects to the knee bone connects to the thigh bone, and the thigh bone connects to the hip bone, right? And that's literally true. Like those things are connected. And so you can't move one without affecting the other ones, right? So just say, so anytime, so if we pronate, we think, okay, well, that might put more stress on the ankle joints, right? And it might put more stress on certain parts of the knee joint because you're kind of rotating that knee joint in a little bit. But it also takes stress off the other side of the knee joint, right? Like we said before, when you put more stress somewhere, it's because you're moving the stress from somewhere to somewhere else. So if there's more stress on one place, it means there's less stress on some other place, right? So if you're rolling your feet in, you're putting more stress somewhere, less stress somewhere else. Well, how do we know that that's not a functional adaptive response for you? Because maybe the place that you're taking stress off is a weak spot for you, right? Maybe you're adapting to your own unique biomechanics, or maybe you've got, your particular, muscle insertions and origins, like where your muscles attach to your hip and your knee and whatever is, slightly different for everybody. Some people's muscles attach a little bit further down, some people's attach a little bit further up, whatever. Maybe because of your particular, set of muscle attachments, when your legs are a bit rotated in like that, you can generate more power, right? Compared to when your legs are rotated out a bit. Maybe that's just unique to some people. Okay. And so if you're Haile Gebrselassie, right, and you've broken 24 world records with your feet rolling in, right, because that's where you generate the most power, right? And we come along and coach you and say, oh no, rotate your legs out so that your arches are up. And all of a sudden, now you can't generate that maximal force. And suddenly you're, coming 10th in the marathon instead of breaking the world record, right? Or maybe you're Haile Gebrselassie and your brain and central nervous system knows that the ligament on the outside of your knee is not as robust as the ligament on the inside of your knee, right? So it rolls your brain rolls your legs in a bit to stress the medial ligament, which is stronger, and offload the lateral ligament, which is weaker, right? And then just say we say, no, lift your arches, okay? And then you run, and a few weeks later, you sprain a ligament in your knee and you're off for 6 months, right? So how do we know that there aren't going to be second order consequences of changing something? And we think it's like, oh, it's just so simple, like lift your arches. But no, anytime you do that, you're changing the ankle, the knee, the hip, you're probably changing the spine, probably changing what's happening in the shoulders as well. So it's all connected. All right. So that's all I'm going to talk about on that one. And there is a question actually that I was going to talk about, but I believe, Tracy, it's from you. Are you the same Tracy who sent me that question about fascia and rolling? And if so, are you in a position to unmute and verbalize it to us?
Oh, hi, Raph. Yes, it was me. So my question is that I was taught that if you've got a tight muscle, then you can do some fascia release, like with a ball or something like that. And then when you go to do the exercise, you're going to have released all those big major muscles, and so the small muscle groups will work better. And just by listening to you recently about, tightness, and I've listened to your podcast on fascinating, that just, the question came to me. I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing, or, someone feels better, then is that okay? That was just my question.
All right. So if we're, people say when we're foam rolling or rolling on a lacrosse ball or whatever, spiky ball, that we're releasing fascia or releasing muscles. And so is that in fact what's happening? And if not, what the heck are we doing? Is that the question, or have I misunderstood it?
Yep, that's pretty much, yep.
Is there anything else that you need to add to that? Like, did I miss any part of it?
No.
All right. Well, I'm going to crowdsource this one. Is there anyone who wants to take a stab at this, take a guess at it, has an opinion on it, has a similar question? And I'm prepared to put up with up to a minute of awkward silence.
is it the same kind of thing as stretching? Like it might make you feel good, feels good while you're doing it, but then once you stop, it might release you temporarily, but then it's not a sort of a long-lasting thing.
Right. So, most of you guys must have done some kind of self-massage at some point, right? Like you might have rolled on a roller or even just like rubbed your own arm or something, when you had a sore body part. It's kind of instinctive, right? You got a sore bit, you want to kind of rub on it. And you probably noticed that felt better, right? But then that better feeling didn't last for ages, did it? Like, an hour later, the next day at the longest, you're like, oh, gee, that hurts again, right? So if you had a sore knee and you rolled on the side of your thigh on a foam roller, you're like, oh, that really kills. But then after you finish rolling, it feels better. The knee feels better, right? But it doesn't feel better forever. The next day it hurts again. So, yeah. So, well, what do you think of that? What do you make of that? I mean, if we're doing something to the fascia, if we're releasing adhesions, say, would you expect whatever adhesions are? Would you expect them to come back in an hour or overnight? Have you heard that theory about adhesions? Have you heard the word adhesions in relation to fascia? That's what often my massage therapist used to tell me they're doing, is breaking up adhesions. You never heard that one? Well, what have you heard that, or what have you possibly just assumed? Maybe you read it somewhere or something. What have you heard or assumed that you're doing when you're foam rolling? So if you're rolling on the side of your thigh, people tell you you're rolling your IT band or your ITB on the side of your thigh there. Like, what are you doing? Like, why does it feel better after? Do you think?
I just imagine that you were loosening your muscles.
I see a few people nodding, right? Is that something you've been exposed to? Yeah. And Andrew says increasing range of motion. And in fact, there is research showing that when you roll on a foam roller, it increases your range of motion, right? Or when you massage yourself with a massage gun or a lacrosse ball or spiky ball or whatever, it temporarily increases your range of motion. We know it does that. And we know that when you stretch, like if you just sort of hold a static stretch, right, for a few seconds, well, that also increases your range of motion temporarily, but the static stretch decreases your strength, right? So if I hold a static stretch for a few seconds, for like a minute maybe, right, I get more range of motion in my shoulder temporarily, but I also temporarily decrease the maximum strength and power of my shoulder, right? So static stretching is a pretty terrible warm-up, right? Whereas if I put a massage gun on my shoulder, okay, or roll on a spiky ball or whatever on my shoulder, well, that also increases my range of motion temporarily, but it doesn't reduce my strength or power. So that probably is a useful part of a warm-up if you need to increase your range of motion, as part of your warm. Like if you're a bit tight in a body part and you can't do the activity that you're warming up for very effectively because of that tightness, well, massaging it might be a good, not the full warm-up, but it might be part of an effective warm-up. But the question is, how does it increase range? Why? Why does that increase? Why does pressing on your muscle a few times, give you more range of motion? What's happening in there? All right. So there's a few answers here. Lessening tension, improving blood flow, the heat that you generate. Okay. And I've heard all of these and they all sound kind of plausible on the face of it, right? But it turns out that what we really kind of think about them a little bit more closely, well, that's not the case. Well, just say we did some stretching. Well, doesn't that increase blood flow to an area? So that increases range of motion, but why does it make you less strong? And what's different about that to foam rolling or massage gun or whatever? Or just say we put like, I don't know, you know, when you roll on a muscle, right? Well, it does feel kind of looser afterwards, doesn't it? Right. But the question is why? Right. So you've lessened the tension, right? But why? I mean, if you get a piece of steak, right, and put it on the bench and then get a rolling pin and roll over it a few times, does that change the properties of the steak? I mean, think about how much pressure you would apply to your thigh with a rolling pin, right? Before you would scream and beg for mercy, right? And apply that same amount of pressure to a steak, right? Not a lot of pressure. I'm not talking about hitting it with a meat tenderizer hammer, right? I'm talking about just rolling it on a foam roller. Well, roll a foam roller over your steak, right? Would that change? Would that make the steak relax? You know, would it release tension from like? So there's probably not a direct mechanical effect of like when you press on a muscle, it makes it relax. Well, I mean, right now, most of us are sitting down, right, on our butts. So our butt is subject to pressure, right? Well, does that make our butts more flexible? You know, after you sit down for a few hours, is your butt like really like loose and, you know, flexible? So, well, that kind of common sense test, you know, it doesn't really pass, does it? You know, if it was just like pressure on a muscle that makes it, you know, releases tension somehow, it's like, well, yeah, I mean, anytime you sat on a rock, you would, you know, have less stiffness in your body. And that's not the case. Like if you sleep on a rock all night, what happens? You're more stiff, not less stiff. Right? So, all right. So Belinda says it's the increased blood flow, the nervous system response, and fascia releasing or release of muscle fibers. Well, there's a lot in there. And a couple of other people have written fascial release as well. And there is pretty compelling evidence that fascia doesn't release. There are a couple of studies where they basically get cadavers, you know, dead people who've donated their bodies to science, and they press on their IT band. You know, like they pull the skin off and the fat that's beneath the skin, and they get a special machine that presses on the IT band and measures how hard it's pressing. And then they measure the IT band, like whether it deforms, you know, whether it stretches, sort of thing. And they've done this experiment and found that it takes about 920 kilograms of force to deform the IT band by 1%. Right? 920. Like, so if you're like, you know, massaging your thigh, for instance, like you're not going to apply that much force. I mean, 900, like if you drop 920 kilos on your foot, you would break every bone in your foot. Right? If you're sitting on the couch and a 920 kilo dog came and sat on your lap, like you would be dead pretty quickly. Right? That's as much as a medium-sized car. Right? That's just a huge amount of force to apply to deform the IT band by 1%. Right? So the main function of the IT band is to distribute force between the hip and the knee, and it stores elastic energy when you run and when you walk. So it needs to be incredibly stiff and strong to perform those functions. So it's designed to be minimally able to be deformed. So yeah, we know that mechanical pressure can't deform the IT band. So that kind of argument has been, I guess, discarded. That idea has been discarded now. And another thing that we observe, have you ever try this on yourself at home this afternoon? If you've got a pain in one body part, so just say you've got a sore knee on your left leg, right? If you roll on the IT band on your right leg, right, the non-sore leg, right, see if that has any effect on the pain on your sore leg, right? And chances are it will help, because there's this non-local effect of rolling on your IT band or any other part, right, that it just improves pain basically anywhere in your body, right? So if you've got a sore neck and you're rolling your IT band on a roller, it'll probably help your neck pain as well. So that seems to suggest that it's not a local mechanical effect, right? Like, if we were doing if it was something we were doing to a muscle or a tendon or a bit of fascia or something, it's like, well, how would rolling on your right thigh make your left knee feel better, or your neck, or whatever? So, and Belinda says, okay, I'll rephrase it. All other fascial tissues other than the ITB. So we can deform some fascia. Like there was one experiment where they found that you could deform the nasal fascia, right? Fascia in your nose, right? That humans are strong enough to deform that. But like, there may be other bits of fascia in your knee or whatever that are as malleable as your nose. But if so, they couldn't be major structural contributors to excess tension, surely. Right? So, and Belinda, this is a very interesting conversation. So thank you for your contribution. So Belinda says, what about myofascial slings? And does anyone else know what myofascial slings are and want to have a crack at explaining in 10 words or less what a myofascial sling is? Like, you don't have to define all of the different slings or anything. We're just like, if I'm from Mars and I've never heard of a myofascial sling, can you tell me the basic gist of what one is? Who wants to have a crack at it? Best way to learn is to teach. Should I call on a volunteer? Well, it won't be Andrea Lloyd because she's already contributed. It won't be Belinda because Belinda's already contributing. Go on, type it into if you're a bit bashful to unmute, or maybe you're worried about having the answer wrong, don't worry about that. But if you're a bit bashful to unmute, send it to me as a direct message so no one else can see it. And I promise you, your anonymity will be protected. What do you think? What's a myofascial sling? Georgie nailed it. Bam, Georgie. Awesome. Georgie says it's a string of fascia that connects different body parts. Bam, that's all it is. It's just a bit of fascia that goes from one body part to another body part, right? And we give it the fancy name of myofascial slings. But, there's some fascia that goes from, say, your foot to your knee, right? So anytime you move your foot, you also move your knee. It's like, well, that seems pretty straightforward, right? I mean, we just experienced it. So it's a sling, it's a bit of fascia that we can cut out of the body as one piece that goes from your foot to your knee, to your hip, to your low back, to whatever, and they kind of crisscross the body and go in different directions. And so the question from Belinda is, okay, well, can myofascial slings explain why, say, releasing your right IT band would change your pain in your left knee, right? Because is there a kind of a band of fascia that kind of connects those two? And if you loosen off tension on one side, well, it stops pulling and across and across and across, and then that reduces the pull on the other side. And there's a bunch of research on this that we look at. So that typically the myofascial slings that we talk about are the big ones, like it's called the posterior oblique sling. So it's like the fascia of your lat, okay, which goes down into your lower back. Okay, it inserts into your lower back. It's called the lumbodorsal fascia in your lower back. And then that fascia connects into your opposite gluteus maximus, right? So if we thought about it from a visual perspective, your lat is here, your lumbodorsal fascia is here, and your glute is here. So there's literally a continuous band of tissue that goes from the right side of your rib cage to your left hip, right? And you can dissect that out of the body in one piece. Okay. And this is the concept that is, was kind of coined by Tom Myers as anatomy trains. And that's exactly right. So well done, Chloe. So we got really super excited about this because we're thinking like, oh, well, anytime you tense your lat, that's going to put force through your glute, right? So your lat and your opposite glute are connected, and then that continues down because the glute inserts into the IT band, right? And the IT band inserts into the knee and inserts into the calf as well. So your right lat connects to your left knee and your left calf via that posterior oblique sling, right? And so anytime you tension your right lat, okay, it puts load on your left knee. Is this kind of sort of making sense, this concept? Okay. Well, I was totally part of this, wave, right? I had all of the Anatomy Trains books. I've since let go of them because then you won't see them in the bookcase behind me here. But I totally was into this. I watched all Thomas Myers videos and all of that. And it's a brilliant theory and I love it, but it turns out it doesn't work. And here's why, right? I mean, just think about it logically for a sec. Okay, lift your right arm. Did your left knee move? No, it didn't. Okay. Well, that should be enough for us to let go of that idea, right? Let's try a couple more experiments. Okay, don't move your arm, but just like tense your lat. Can you tense your lat? Okay, tense it super hard. Did your left knee move? No, it didn't. Okay, tense your left butt cheek. Can you tense your left butt cheek? Tense it super hard. Did your right shoulder move? No, it didn't. Okay, so common sense tells us this isn't really a thing, okay? And what they find experimentally is when they dissect cadavers, right? So we get, a dead body, human body, and we pull off the skin and the subcutaneous fat, okay? Cutaneous is your skin, so subcutaneous fat is just the fat that's directly under your skin. We all have it. Okay? And then underneath is the fascia and the muscles and the tendons. And they put a strain gauge on the lat. They measure if the lat is being stretched, okay? And then they put a dynamometer on the glute, left lat, right glute, or vice versa, okay? And they pull on the glute, right? And the dynamometer tells them how much they're pulling, right? And the strain gauge tells them how much, if at all, the lat is being stretched, okay? And what they find is that when you pull on that glute, okay, it transfers a pull to the lat, okay, but that pull only travels about 1 or 2 inches up the lat, right? So your lat goes from here to there. Your lat is probably 18 or 20 inches long, right? From your lumbar spine to your shoulder, right? And what I'm saying is when you pull on the glute of a dead body, right, the right glute, say, it deforms the first 1 to 2 inches of that lat, right down in the base of the lumbar spine there, right? But if you're sitting at the top of the lat near the shoulder, you could rest a glass of champagne there, it wouldn't be disturbed. Does that make sense to you? Right? Plus, when you think about, okay, this is on a dead body, right? So what they're doing is they're pulling on the glute. They get a pair of forceps and they pull on it, right? Which is not the same thing as tensing the glute, right? Plus, dead bodies are kept they're pickled basically in formaldehyde, right? So that they don't deteriorate as quickly, right? Formaldehyde causes proteins to denature. Like when you boil an egg, right? Or fry an egg, right? The egg white is protein, right? And when it denatures, it becomes solid, right? And once a protein, that's when it's fried, right? When it's cooked. So once a protein is denatured, you can't renature it, right? You can't put the genie back in the bottle there, right? Once an egg's fried, you can't unfry it, right? So if you heat it up, it denatures, but if you cool it down again, it doesn't resume its original form, right? So once a body's been pickled in formaldehyde, the proteins in your tissue, like all of your whole body is made of proteins, right? Your muscles are made of proteins, your fascia is made of protein, everything's made of protein, right? You've basically become a fried egg, or a pickled egg, more accurately, okay? And once it's pickled, you can't unpickle it, right? And denatured protein is stiff. That's one of its properties, right? I mean, a fried egg is stiffer than a raw egg, right? And the more you fry it, the more stiff it gets. Same with boiling it, right? So corpses are stiff, especially pickled ones. So when you pull on one bit, more force is going to be transmitted in a stiff corpse that's got denatured proteins compared to in a living body that's more, like if you pull on one end of a raw egg, right, it's not going to pull on the other, like once it's sitting in the pan or the bowl or whatever, right? So anyway, we should have just let it go after we moved our right arm and it didn't move our left knee. But so the whole anatomy trains thing was a brilliant idea, and I was so in love with it myself for a number of years, but it just hasn't stood up to experimental, scrutiny or even really just common sense, right? So, well, it turns out that all of these tissues, so muscles, ligaments, tendons, fascia, all of this stuff, all are innervated. They'll have nerves in them, right? That's how you know when you're rolling on, you've rolled on your thigh, right? It hurts like buggery, right? Because you've got nerves in your fascia, you've got nerves in your muscle, you've got nerves in your skin, okay? And when you squeeze the living daylights out of those structures, they go, ouch. And so all of those structures are innervated, which means they send a signal to your spinal cord and brain, right? So whatever you roll on, whether it's fascia or muscle or tendon or ligament or bone or whatever, like you get a signal going to your brain, right? And when we think about an effect that can be non-local, right? Well, that should be one of the contenders for that, what's causing that effect should be the nervous system, right? Because the nervous system controls everything in the body. That's a job. It's a regulator. It's a control mechanism. Second thing is it's temporary, right? So if we truly made a physiological change to that tissue, you would expect that change to endure, right? So if we went in and literally stretched that tissue till it was longer, right? Or if we tenderized it with a meat tenderizer until it was softer, right? You would expect it to not go back in an hour to how it was before, right? Whereas if we play some weird ass trick on your brain, so your brain thinks, oh, my knee doesn't hurt anymore, well, you would expect that to wear off after a while, right? Because what happens when your brain, makes that pain go away is basically you release some endogenous opioids, probably, like your own pharmacy chest that you've got inside your brain that, it's like taking a Panadol, or what do we call Panadol in the US? Paracetamol is the name of the drug. Eric? Ibuprofen is the other one, but what's paracetamol in the US called? Chloe?
Acetaminophen.
Acetaminophen.
Sorry, I couldn't help you on that one.
Yeah, because you don't know, like you're thinking like, what the heck's paracetamol? Never heard of that crazy. Yeah, we just call it paracetamol, is the name for the drug, whereas in the US it's acetaminophen, same thing. And it just basically that lands in and lodges in some receptors that we have in our brain, but we have receptors in our brain because we make our own painkillers, right? If we didn't make our own painkillers, we wouldn't need receptors for painkillers. So when you and it's well established that if you stick your hand, if you've got a sore knee, if you stick your hand in an ice bucket so that it's cold enough that it's painful on your hand, well, that makes your knee hurt less, right? Or if you've got a headache and you stick your hand in an ice bucket, that makes your headache hurt less. It's because it basically turns down the volume on the pain processing in your brain. So that was a super long conversation about foam rolling, and I guess the summary is we're probably doing nothing at a mechanical level to the tissues, whether it's muscles or fascia or anything else. We're probably down-regulating the nervous system. And because when you have, just say you have knee pain, right? Well, automatically you guard. Like when you've got a sore wrist, you don't flop it around everywhere. You try and kind of keep it still, right? When you've got a sore elbow, whatever, you want to guard it. And that's not a bad thing. That's normal and healthy and adaptive, and that we do that instinctively. Animals do it as well. If they've got a sore leg, they kind of keep it still and limp on it, And so when you guard, you do that by tensing the muscles around that joint to kind of splint that area, right? So when you stick your hand in a bucket of cold water, right, or when you roll on a foam roller and that sort of tells your brain that there's no threat, right? And your brain turns down the pain mechanism. Well, the guarding reduces, and so you've got less tension on less muscle tension on either side of that joint. So all of a sudden it is looser, right? Because you're not tensing your muscles as much. So a couple of you, like Eric said, it loosens your muscles. Well, yeah, it does, but it's not a direct effect of the foam rolling. It's indirect because it plays tricks with your brain, and then your brain loosens the muscles, because ultimately what makes muscles contract is the brain, right? I mean, if people who have a spinal cord injury can't contract their muscles because muscles can't contract by themselves, it's just the brain that can tell them to do it. So if muscles are contracting or not contracting, that's a brain thing. Yeah. So, anything that was surprising there for you, or any different perspectives on that? Questions or thoughts?
Raph, can I just ask, is that the fascial slings thing, is that related to the time under tension that trainers talk about? Is it the same thing?
Explain more, please. I don't understand the question.
So instead of, lifting a weight dynamically sort of up and back, I hear a lot of trainers, a lot of personal trainers in particular, talk about, oh yes, but it's time under tension rather than load because it's your myofascial slings. And I've had a couple of them try and explain it to me, and it didn't really make any sense.
Well, if someone tries to explain something to you and it doesn't make any sense, that tells you that they don't understand it well enough.
Yeah, okay. Because it's about when you're strengthening muscles, it's about the load, not about the time under tension. Is that correct?
Correct.
It's about yes, okay.
And just think about, so the whole idea of time under tension is not a valid idea, right? Think about this. You run a marathon, right? That takes, if you're a world-class elite athlete, that takes a minute over 2 hours, right? That's a lot of, how many reps do you do in your leg muscles in that time? How many steps would you take, right? Tens of thousands, right? That's a lot of time under tension, right? Or alternatively, different exercise regime, you go to the gym, you lift up 4 times your body weight as a squat, right? And you do 2 reps of that. Who gets stronger legs?
The weightlifter.
Right. Who had more time under tension?
The runner.
The runner, right? So time under tension is not the most important factor in developing strength. It's how much load you put through the system, right? So if you want to get stronger anything, you've got to subject that body part to more load.
Load.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So the time under tension hypothesis is not true. Turns out to be not supported. And then relating that to it's your myofascial slings, I think is, to me, just sounds like someone's kind of got a few different buzzwords floating around in their brain and they're just kind of
connecting
pushing them all together.
Yeah.
In a kind of a meaningless, word salad.
Yeah. I'm working with a newish trainer because I've moved and I've developed a second frozen shoulder, and so we're working. Yes, it does. So we're just sort of working around that, and just some of the stuff that he says. Sometimes I just want to shake my head and go, "No, that just doesn't make any sense," and I know that's not true.
Yeah. So for frozen shoulder, and now you're probably all across this research already, but do you know what the best thing is for a frozen shoulder? Or do you know what the prognosis is for a frozen shoulder?
I know I've had one before. This is my second one. From the research that I've looked at for pain reduction is a steroid injection, and I have had one of those, and I will be having another one. But I've been I've been focusing a bit on Adam Meakin's stuff, and he reckons eccentric loading. So I've been doing a bit of that as well. He said it's not. He said it uses it anecdotally a lot. He said there's research for the lower half of the body that eccentric loading seems to work. And so what he does is, for example, for external rotation, he'll put your arms on a stack of books and then a weight in your hand and just get you to do the eccentric movement and then pull it back up again. But basically at this stage I've got so much pain that I'm just doing pulling and pushing movements in the sort of the sagittal plane, and that seems to be okay. In the last probably week or two, I've probably lost another 20% of external rotation. So it's just starting to really stiffen up, because I didn't have that much stiffness to start with, so it was a bit hard to diagnose. But the pain's been excruciating this time, so I've had a bit of steroids, and she said I can have another one. And then outside of that, she said you basically have to wait until it's got into the frozen phase and it starts to thaw, and then you start to work your rehab a bit more and try and get the range of motion back. It's too painful to do much now. I've tried to do swimming. I've tried to do a few things to keep it moving, but the pain's been awful.
Yep. So frozen shoulder, for those of you who aren't as knowledgeable as Chloe, is it's a condition where it kind of is what it says, that your shoulder kind of seizes up and you lose particularly external rotation range, but often flexion range as well. And particularly the combination of the two, so people, and also internal rotation. People often can't sort of do up their bra strap or, put their shirt on or that kind of thing. And it has two phases. It has a painful phase, which is the first phase, and then it has the frozen phase, which is where the pain subsides quite a lot, but the range of motion is severely limited. And it comes on mostly for unknown reasons. Like, we used to call it adhesive capsulitis, because people would have these kind of granules in their shoulder capsule that would physically limit the range of motion. But what we now know is that a significant proportion of people with frozen shoulder don't have that, right? So that people with frozen shoulder can have the capsular changes or not, and they still have very, very similar symptoms. And it has a natural history. So, if left untreated, it generally goes away all by itself in a couple of years. And the biggest risk factor for frozen shoulder is a previous history of frozen shoulder. And being, I think, female between the ages of 30 and 50 sort of thing. And there is reasonably good evidence that early corticosteroid injection into the joint, it's called intra-articular, within the joint, combined with physiotherapy, so basically exactly what Chloe's described, is the best current treatment. So that can significantly shorten the time course to recovery when you get an early steroid injection plus exercise. But there's no silver bullet that really, fixes it. And there's no one form of exercise that seems to be better or, in terms of robust evidence. But, most physios would apply some form of stretching or what Chloe's talking about, eccentric training, where you're doing basically, it's kind of loaded stretching, basically.
Interestingly, this time, Raph, and maybe because I'm more conscious of it because I've obviously done the clinical diploma and I've got that knowledge, but I find if I don't do any strength work on it, the pain is increased. Whereas I don't remember that. Last time I didn't have as much of a painful phase. It's sort of, the painful phase was very short, and then I had a hydrodilatation with steroids in it, and that worked really well for range of motion, whereas this time it's quite different. But I do find that if I don't do any sort of strength work, I have a lot more pain.
Well, great. You found something that helps a bit. And, who knows why that is, but strength training does seem to have some kind of analgesic effect in general, so maybe it's not specific about strengthening the shoulder per se, but just any kind of strength work might have a similar beneficial effect.
Yeah.
Like doing squats or whatever might help.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we are just about out of time. And I want to say thanks so much to all of you who asked questions. Thanks so much to all of you who contributed to the conversation. And if you sent in a question during the week and I didn't get to it, I'm sorry. But if you can manage to show up for the live session, you'll get your questions answered. And I will do my best to get to those ones on the backlog during the week. And this recording will be available in the Facebook group. If you haven't already joined up, there's a link in the chat there, and there'll be a link in the follow-up email that we send you just to confirm where the link is. So, is there anything else I need to mention that I forgot to, Lauren? I think that's it. Great. So thanks so much, all of you. It's really awesome. I love hanging out and talking about this stuff. It's fun, and I hope you find it interesting and useful. And if anything I say feels like that doesn't kind of make sense to me, not as in necessarily don't understand it, but as in like, that doesn't jibe with what I've previously heard or whatever, feel free to email me or reach out on social media or whatever, and I will be glad to continue the discussion, with citations if appropriate. So hope you have a great week, and I'll see you soon.
Thanks, Raph. Thanks a lot.